December 7th, 1941, 6:15 a.m. The morning mist clings to Pearl Harbor like a shroud, wrapping the sleeping giants of Battleship Row in deceptive peace. Aboard the USS West Virginia, sailors move through their Sunday routines, coffee brewing in the galley, the smell of bacon drifting across steel decks still cool from the Hawaiian night. 230 miles north, 20-year-old Mori Juzo grips the controls of his Nakajima B5N Kate torpedo bomber, his hands trembling. Not from cold, but from the weight of what hangs beneath his aircraft. An 1,800-pound Type 91 torpedo, specially modified with breakaway wooden fins designed for the impossible. A successful attack in Pearl Harbor's shallow, confined waters. The carrier, Soryu, pitches violently in the pre-dawn darkness. Juzo can hear his radio man Kato checking equipment behind him, the metallic clicks of ammunition belts, the whispered prayers of men who know they're flying into hell. Around him, his squadron mates prepare for what their training has taught them is likely a one-way mission. "We're going to be the first to arrive at Yasukuni Shrine," Juzo mutters to himself, referencing the shrine where Japanese war dead are honored. The brutal math is simple. To successfully drop their fish at just 200 yards, closer than anyone has ever attempted, they must fly straight and level through whatever the Americans can throw at them, at 15 feet above the water, with no room for evasive maneuvers. But here's what neither Juzo nor his fellow pilots understand as they prepare for their historic attack. They are about to encounter something that will fundamentally change the nature of aerial warfare forever. What started as a revolution in American naval defense is about to meet Japanese aviation's finest in a collision that will reshape the entire Pacific War. The question isn't whether brave men will die today. It's whether the tactics that brought Japan this far can survive what America has been secretly preparing. To understand the catastrophe about to unfold, you have to go back to 1940, when America's naval anti-aircraft defenses were, frankly, a joke. Picture this: mighty battleships armed with 50-caliber machine guns and the infamous Chicago piano, a quad-mounted 1.1-inch cannon so unreliable that its shells would explode in the barrel if fired into heavy rain. Naval officers joked grimly that the 1.1-inch was more dangerous to its own crew than to enemy aircraft. But one man saw the writing on the wall. Rear Admiral Ernest J. King, serving on the General Board, had become obsessed with a terrifying possibility. What if aviation had advanced faster than anyone realized? What if the next war would be won and lost in the air? In early 1940, King accompanied Navy Secretary Charles Edison on a fleet inspection tour. What King saw horrified him. Ship after ship mounted with inadequate, obsolete anti-aircraft weapons. Crews trained on equipment that belonged in the previous war. A fleet completely unprepared for modern air attack. King moved with ruthless efficiency. By August 1940, he had established the Anti-Aircraft Defense Board and declared lack of adequate automatic weapons the most serious weakness in the readiness of the Navy for war. He demanded $300 million, an astronomical sum, for immediate improvements. Congress, sensing the approaching storm, approved it all. Ruthless surgery, they called King's approach. He personally reviewed every ship class, dictating which installations had to be ripped out to make room for new guns. The 20mm Oerlikon from Switzerland, a simple, reliable weapon that could fire 480 rounds per minute. The devastating 40mm Bofors from Sweden, a gun so powerful its 2-pound shells could self-destruct at 4,000 yards, preventing friendly fire casualties. But the real revolution was happening in laboratories across America. Dr. Charles Draper at MIT was perfecting the Mark 14 sight, a gyroscopic marvel that could calculate lid angles automatically. Scientists were developing something called the VT proximity fuse, essentially a miniature radar unit in each shell that would explode when it sensed an aircraft nearby. Meanwhile, in Japan, Morijuzo was enduring the most brutal flight training imaginable. Every morning at 8 a.m., his squadron would form up over Mount Kirishima at 12,000 feet, then dive in trail formation straight at Kagoshima Harbor. Picture this: screaming down at 130 knots, pulling out at just 15 feet above the water, so low that their altimeters were useless and fishing boats were knocked flat by their wake. Day after day, we climbed up on something to put our eyes at exactly 15 feet above ground to get used to the sight picture, Juzo would later write. They practiced torpedo drops at 200 yards, a distance so close it required split-second timing and nerves of steel. One mistake meant joining the wreckage on the harbor floor. The Japanese pilots were supremely confident. They were flying the world's most advanced carrier-based torpedo bomber. Their training was more intensive than any Air Force had ever attempted. They had developed special shallow water torpedoes that could run true in Pearl Harbor's confined spaces. What they didn't know was that every month they trained, American defenses were evolving exponentially. Shore-based anti-aircraft training centers were mass-producing gunners who understood coordinated fire. New radar systems were being installed on ship after ship. The proximity fuse was moving from laboratory to production. By late 1941, the collision course was set. Japanese aviation, representing the pinnacle of tactical aviation development, was about to meet American naval defense that had transformed itself in just 18 months from laughably inadequate to the most sophisticated in the world. But nobody, not even Admiral King, fully understood what was about to happen. The Japanese had trained for surgical strikes against poorly defended targets. The Americans had built a system designed to create walls of coordinated fire that nothing could penetrate. The morning of December 7th would test both philosophies in the most dramatic way possible. And while Pearl Harbor would shock America into war, it would also reveal something else. The age of the torpedo bomber was about to end in a storm of precisely aimed steel and explosives that would redefine what naval warfare could become. 6 a.m., December 7th, 1941. The signal fires from flagship Akagi pierce the pre-dawn darkness. Prepare to launch planes. Morijuzo feels his Nakajima Kate drop away from Soryu's flight deck like a stone, the massive torpedo beneath dragging his aircraft toward the black Pacific swells. Around him, 40 torpedo bombers form up in the darkness, their navigation lights looking like fireflies against the morning stars. Behind them, dive bombers and Zero fighters complete the first wave, 183 aircraft total, carrying Japan's hopes for quick victory. The sun rises as they approach Oahu, revealing puffy trade wind clouds and impossibly blue water. "Hey, there's Hawaii," Juzo calls to his radio man Kato. "Look out, Mr. Enemy. Your blue eyeballs will soon be spinning." The relaxed atmosphere feels like just another training flight. There's no sense that they're heading toward what will become the most intensely defended waters in naval history. But as they approach the northwest tip of Oahu, threading through the Waianae Mountains, reality begins to intrude. Wheeler Field spreads before them, 200 American fighters lined up in perfect rows. Juzo's rear gunner Hayakawa opens fire with his 7.70 machine gun, tracers arcing down toward the parked aircraft, the first shots of Pearl Harbor. Then Pearl Harbor itself opens before them like a tactical dream. Battleship row, 8 massive warships moored in pairs, exactly as their intelligence photos showed. No torpedo nets protecting their exposed sides. The Americans have never imagined that torpedo planes could maneuver in such confined space. We were surprised to find that the carriers, our main targets, were gone, Juzo later recalled. The Enterprise and Lexington, their primary objectives, had left port the day before. But those battleships... We'll just sink every one of those battleships instead. Juzo follows Lieutenant Nagai down toward the harbor, altitude dropping to precisely 15 feet above the water. At 130 knots, with the massive torpedo creating drag, his engine strains audibly. Oil drops spatter his windscreen. The moment of truth approaches. The first American anti-aircraft fire erupts. Not the coordinated curtain they'll develop later, but scattered, panicked shooting from crews caught completely off guard. Still, it's enough to be deadly. Juzo watches one of his squadron mates burst into flames, the pilot attempting a final kamikaze dive into a battleship's bridge. The explosion when he hits creates a column of black smoke that hangs motionless in the still air. Nagai drops his torpedo first. A massive column of water erupts where it strikes. But Juzo realizes with horror that his flight leader has hit the wrong target. That's no battleship, he thinks. It's a cruiser. In the confusion and adrenaline, flying at high speed just feet above the water, even experienced pilots can make fatal identification errors. Juzo banks hard left, his wingtip seemingly inches above the harbor surface. The maneuver is dangerous as hell, but it lines him up with a real battleship, USS California. He has one chance, one torpedo, one run through whatever the Americans can throw at him. As he steadies on his attack heading, the American defensive fire intensifies. Not yet the devastating curtain it will become, but deadly enough. Kang, 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 the sound of bullets hammering his aircraft. The control stick vibrates violently in his hands. Yow! Screams his rear gunner. Both wings are suddenly full of holes. But American anti-aircraft doctrine in December 1941 is still primitive. Individual guns firing independently, no coordination, no proximity fuses, just raw volume and desperate courage. The destroyer and cruiser crews below are laying down everything they have, but it's uncoordinated fire that Juzo can fly through if he holds his nerve. At 250 yards from California, flying straight and level at exactly 15 feet, Juzo holds his breath and releases his torpedo. The Kate leaps skyward as the massive weight drops away. Behind him, Kato raises his hand in triumph. "We got her!" The torpedo runs true, striking California amidships with a tremendous explosion. But look at the cost. Of the 40 torpedo planes that began this attack, 5 are already smoking wrecks in Pearl Harbor's waters. The Americans, caught completely by surprise, have still managed to exact a 12.5% casualty rate with their inadequate, hastily manned guns. This is December 7th, 1941. This is America's anti-aircraft defense at its most primitive and unprepared. Now fast forward 10 months, October 26th, 1942, Battle of Santa Cruz. The same pilot, if he's survived this long, faces a completely different reality. Lieutenant Juzo approaches USS Hornet through what can only be described as a wall of steel. Every American ship is firing, not individual guns, but coordinated batteries directed by radar fire control systems. The 40mm Bofors guns are throwing 2-pound explosive shells at 120 rounds per minute per barrel. Quad mounts mean 480 rounds per minute of devastating firepower from single positions. The proximity fuses have arrived. No longer do American gunners need direct hits. Their 5-inch shells explode automatically when they sense aircraft nearby. A 1,000-round requirement has dropped to 250. The mathematical reality is crushing. American ships can throw up curtains of fire that nothing can penetrate. Watch the numbers tell the story. Of 53 Japanese aircraft attacking at Santa Cruz, 38 are destroyed, a 72% casualty rate. Of 20 torpedo bombers specifically, 16 are shot down, an 80% loss rate. These aren't just statistics. These are trained pilots with years of experience, flying the world's most advanced aircraft. meeting defensive fire so intense it defies comprehension. The transformation is complete. In 10 months, American anti-aircraft defense has evolved from adequate to devastating to essentially impenetrable. The brave young men like Juzo who survived Pearl Harbor are facing a completely different war, one where their tactics, their training, their very aircraft have become obsolete. The curtain of American fire has become a wall that torpedo bombers simply cannot penetrate and survive. By 1944, the mathematics of aerial warfare had become brutally simple. Japanese commanders calculated that conventional torpedo and dive bombing attacks now required 300 aircraft to achieve just 12 hits on American ships, with 220 aircraft lost in the process. The same 12 hits could be achieved with just 60 kamikaze aircraft, still a 100% loss rate, but the math made horrifying sense. For survivors like Mori Juzo, this transformation meant something personal and devastating. In August 1945, after 3 years of watching his tactics become obsolete and his squadrons decimated, he received orders that would have been unthinkable in 1941. Report for kamikaze training. The Imperial Navy was officially admitting that conventional attack methods could no longer penetrate American defenses. I had accumulated 3,800 hours of combat flying experience, recalled another torpedo bomber pilot, Takeshi Maida. I couldn't believe my commanders wanted to waste all that in a single mission. But there was no choice. The wall of American anti-aircraft fire had made traditional aviation tactics not just dangerous, but mathematically impossible. The revolution that began with Admiral King's desperate 1940 overhaul had culminated in American naval forces that could destroy more than one-third of all attacking aircraft. Approximately 2,773 Japanese planes shot down by shipboard anti-aircraft fire alone. The proximity fuse, mass-produced American radar systems, and coordinated fire control had created defensive capabilities that World War II aviation simply could not overcome. But the human cost transcended statistics. At the 1991 Pearl Harbor commemoration, an elderly Mori Juzo stood face-to-face with John Rauschkolb, a Navy signalman who had been aboard USS West Virginia, the very ship Juzo's torpedo had helped sink 50 years earlier. "I'm very sorry," Juzo said. Rauschkolb's response captured something profound about the nature of technological warfare. "Don't be sorry. You were doing your job. I was doing mine. We were taking orders." The story of Japanese torpedo bombers meeting America's anti-aircraft curtain reveals something crucial about modern warfare. Technological advancement doesn't just change tactics. It can make entire military philosophies obsolete overnight. The same principle applies today, as military planners grapple with hypersonic missiles, autonomous weapons, and cyber warfare capabilities that could render current defensive strategies as obsolete as Juzo's low-level torpedo runs became by 1944. What happened in the Pacific between 1941 and 1945 wasn't just the evolution of anti-aircraft technology. It was a preview of how rapidly the fundamental nature of warfare itself can transform. The brave young pilots who flew through Pearl Harbor's inadequate defenses lived to see their expertise become not just outdated, but tactically suicidal. The wall of American fire didn't just stop torpedo bombers. It marked the end of an entire era of naval aviation and the beginning of our modern understanding that in warfare, yesterday's cutting-edge advantage can become tomorrow's death sentence. Want to see more stories of technological transformation in warfare? Subscribe and hit the notification bell. Because understanding how military innovation reshapes combat isn't just history, it's the key to understanding the conflicts of tomorrow. The morning sun bleeds crimson across the Pacific as Captain Julian Beckton stands on the bridge of USS Laffey, his destroyer cutting through dark waters 60 miles northwest of Okinawa. It's April 16th, 1945, Easter Sunday. The radar scope beside him pulses with green light, sweeping endlessly across a screen that will soon become his lifeline. Contact bearing 040, range 40 miles, closing fast, calls radioman Lawrence Kelly from the Combat Information Center below. His voice carries that peculiar tension of a man who knows death approaches with mathematical precision. In the gun mounts scattered across Laffey's deck, sailors like Fire Controlman George Burnett grip their weapons with sweaty palms. The 20mm and 40mm cannons gleam in the dawn light, beautiful, deadly instruments that represent America's last line of defense. These men have trained endlessly for this moment, but training never captures the raw terror of watching enemy aircraft dive directly at your ship with no intention of pulling out. Somewhere high above the cloud cover, combat air patrol fighters circle like protective hawks. F-6F Hellcats with their massive Pratt & Whitney engines and 6 50 caliber machine guns, the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world. Their pilots scan the horizon through scratched plexiglass canopies, hunting for the distinctive silhouettes of Japanese aircraft. But these aren't ordinary Japanese pilots approaching. These are kamikaze, men who've already written their final letters home, pilots who've embraced death as their mission's ultimate success. They carry 550-pound bombs beneath their wings and harbor no intention of returning to base. The question hanging in the salt-thick air isn't whether the kamikazes will attack. It's whether America's revolutionary combat air patrol system can stop them. Can systematic defense triumph over suicidal determination? In the next 80 minutes, this mathematical equation will be written in fire, blood, and the screaming metal of aircraft torn apart by defensive fire. 6 months earlier, the mathematical certainty of American victory seemed absolute. By October 1944, U.S. Navy fighter direction had evolved into a lethal science. Combat air patrol tactics could intercept conventional attacks with devastating efficiency. Traditional Japanese bombing runs faced a 60% destruction rate before even reaching American ships. The remaining aircraft then confronted a wall of anti-aircraft fire that eliminated another 50% of survivors. But Lieutenant Yukio Seki understood mathematics differently. At 23, this Naval Academy graduate from Ehime Prefecture possessed the analytical mind of an engineer and the heart of a warrior facing impossible odds. Recently married to his beloved Mariko, Seki had served as a flight instructor, teaching young pilots the conventional tactics that were failing so catastrophically against American defenses. On October 20th, 1944, Admiral Takijiro Onishi presented Seki with an equation that defied traditional warfare. What if the pilot became the weapon? What if human guidance replaced mechanical targeting? The 1st Kamikaze Special Attack Corps, 23 Zero fighters under Seki's command, would test this theory against the most sophisticated naval defense system ever created. Seki's final letter to his wife revealed the weight of this mathematical transformation. I am determined to repay the Emperor's grace by carrying out a body-crashing attack on an aircraft carrier with my own body for the Empire of Japan. These weren't the words of a fanatic, but of a man who understood that Japan's survival depended on changing the fundamental equations of naval warfare. American intelligence officers studying these new tactics felt a chill that had nothing to do with Pacific weather. Captain David McCampbell, the Navy's top ace with 34 kills, recognized the strategic implications immediately. They're not trying to return home, he told his squadron. Every plane becomes a guided missile with a human brain. The combat air patrol system had been designed to intercept aircraft that wanted to survive their attacks. Fighters could pursue retreating bombers, radar could predict conventional approach patterns, and anti-aircraft crews could calculate lead times for pilots attempting evasive maneuvers. But kamikazes shattered these assumptions with terrifying simplicity. Combat information centers across the Pacific Fleet began tracking disturbing new patterns. Kamikaze formations would approach normally, then break apart at 50, 60-mile ranges, exactly where KP fighters expected to make their interceptions. Individual aircraft would then employ radical altitude and course changes, using cloud cover to hide from pursuing fighters, sometimes following returning American strike groups to blend with friendly radar returns. Vice Admiral John McCain recognized the threat immediately and began revolutionary counter-adaptations. He doubled fighter complements on carriers, from 38 to 73 aircraft per air group. More importantly, he established JAC patrols, small fighter groups stationed at cardinal points around the fleet, flying below 3,000 feet specifically to catch low-altitude kamikaze approaches that regular KP missions might miss. The Big Blue Blanket became McCain's most aggressive innovation, continuous fighter sweeps over Japanese airfields, destroying kamikazes at their source rather than waiting for defensive interceptions. For 3 straight days in December 1944, American fighters maintained round-the-clock presence over Luzon airfields, preventing enemy aircraft from taking off or landing. But the Japanese adapted too. Kamikaze pilots studied American radar limitations, learning to approach at wave-top level where search radar effectiveness dropped dramatically. They timed attacks for dawn and dusk when KP fighter visibility suffered. Most dangerously, they began coordinating mass attacks designed to overwhelm CIC tracking capacity, launching so many simultaneous threats that American fighter directors couldn't vector interceptors effectively. By April 1945, this deadly chess match had reached Okinawa, the largest Pacific battle and the ultimate test of both systems. Radar picket destroyers like USS Laffey formed an early warning network stretching 95 miles around the main fleet. Each picket station featured 2 to 4 fighter divisions, creating multiple interception opportunities before kamikazes could reach high-value targets. The mathematics favored America, but mathematics had never accounted for the human factor that Yukio Seki had introduced 6 months earlier. As Easter Sunday dawned over Okinawa, those equations were about to face their most brutal examination. At 8:27 a.m., radar operator Seaman Jack Thompson's voice cuts through the morning calm like a blade. Multiple contacts bearing north-northwest, range 38 miles. Count shows 20-plus aircraft approaching in formation. Captain Becton feels his stomach tighten. 20 aircraft against 1 destroyer. The mathematics are simple and terrifying. In the Combat Information Center, green radar sweeps reveal the approaching formation like luminescent death, white blips moving steadily toward Laffey's position. But these aren't conventional bombers maintaining formation. As Thompson watches, the tight group begins fragmenting at exactly 50 miles out, individual aircraft peeling away on erratic courses designed to confuse targeting solutions. "They're breaking up," Thompson calls. Individual contacts spreading across 40-degree arc. I count 7, no 8 separate tracks. High above, Lieutenant Commander Roger M. Hedrick leads his 4-plane Combat Air Patrol Division through broken cloud cover. His F-6F Hellcats 6 machine guns are loaded and ready, but the tactical situation unfolding below violates every engagement rule he's trained for. The enemy aircraft aren't maintaining altitude or course. They're diving, climbing, and turning randomly while approaching the picket line. "Tally-ho!" Hedrick's wingman calls. 2 Vals bearing 270, Angels 8, diving toward the can. Hedrick rolls his Hellcat into a screaming dive, pulling 6 Gs as he attempts to intercept the lead kamikaze. His gun sight centers on the enemy aircraft, an Aichi D-3A Val dive bomber, carrying a 550-pound bomb beneath its fuselage. The Japanese pilot makes no evasive maneuvers. Instead, he adjusts his dive angle to aim directly at Laffey's bridge. Firing! Hedrick squeezes his trigger, sending 2,400 rounds per minute of 50 caliber death toward the kamikaze. Tracers streak through morning air like deadly meteor showers. The enemy aircraft shudders under impacts, pieces of wing and engine cowling, spinning away, but the pilot maintains his dive. On Laffey's deck, Fire Controlman George Burnett watches death approach with horrifying clarity. All hell broke loose, he'll later write. They all started to dive on us at once, and poor little us all by ourselves out there, so you can see we didn't have much of a chance because they were coming from all directions, and you just can't shoot every way at once. The destroyer's 40mm guns open fire with their distinctive pow-pow-pow rhythm. Spent brass casings rain onto the deck like deadly hail. The rapid tat-tat-tat-tat of 20mm cannons joins the symphony of destruction. Gun crews pivot their weapons frantically, trying to track multiple aircraft approaching from different vectors simultaneously. But Hedrick's damaged kamikaze keeps coming. At 8:45 a.m., the Yokosuka D4Y Judy, carrying a 1,250-pound bomb, races toward Laffey's port side at over 300 miles per hour. Paradoxically, crew members later report that the approaching aircraft seemed to move in slow motion, the human brain's desperate attempt to process impending death. Despite the 430 rounds fired in half a minute by the 40 meteors and 20mm guns, Burnett will remember, the kamikaze pilot barreled through. Men instinctively raise their arms to shield their faces as burning gasoline spurts from the mangled wing and ignites a raging fire. The remainder of the plane tumbles over the starboard side and explodes close to the ship. But this is only kamikaze number 1. At 8:47 a.m., kamikaze number 2 screams in from starboard. Seaman Owen Ratter watches transfixed as the aircraft grows larger in his gun sight. You could see the pilot's face, he'll later recall. He was young, maybe 20. He looked determined, not crazy. That was the most frightening thing, how calm he seemed. The impact spreads aviation gasoline across gun mount number 4, immediately igniting gunner's mate Vincent Youngquist and his crew in a conflagration of burning fuel and exploding ammunition. Razor-sharp shrapnel slices through men and equipment while puncturing additional holes in the deck, through which more gasoline and flames pour into compartments below. Above this inferno, Cappy fighters continue their desperate interceptions. Lieutenant Hedrick has splashed 2 kamikazes, but 7 more aircraft circle like vultures, waiting for optimal attack angles. His ammunition indicator shows less than 200 rounds remaining per gun, enough for perhaps 30 seconds of firing. "This is Hedrick. I'm Winchester on ammo but staying on station," he radios. A fighter without ammunition can still disrupt kamikaze approaches through aggressive maneuvering, forcing enemy pilots to deviate from optimal attack profiles. At 8:52 a.m., kamikazes number 10 and 11 attack simultaneously from opposite sides. Radio man Lawrence Kelly stands at his position when the 10th kamikaze, another Val dive bomber, barges through the defensive fire and smacks directly into his station. The collision creates pits in gun barrels up to 112 inches deep, blows gun mount shields upward several feet, and punctures large holes in surrounding deck plating. Simultaneously, Kamikaze 11 drops its bomb 2 feet inboard on the starboard side, creating a 6-foot square hole in the deck plating before disintegrating against Mount 53. The pilot and aircraft literally pulverize against the metal gun mount, bursting into flames that join the growing firestorm, consuming Laffey's aft section. Captain Becton, his uniform singed and blood trickling from shrapnel cuts, surveys the carnage around him. Everywhere you looked, you saw dive bombers or fighters converging on you, he'll later remember. All you could do was hope your gunners would get them. Kamikaze number 12 approaches at 8:54 a.m. with devastating precision. The pilot drops his bomb on the port quarter above the propeller, puncturing through deck plating to explode in a 20 mm ammunition room. The blast damages Laffey's steering mechanism, locking the rudder in position and forcing the destroyer into a perpetual circle, a wounded animal unable to maneuver while predators continue their attacks. In 80 minutes of continuous combat, 5 kamikazes and 3 bombs strike USS Laffey directly. 32 sailors die, and more than 70 suffer wounds. But the ship survives, testimony to both American engineering and the mathematical reality that even suicidal determination cannot guarantee tactical success against systematic defense. As smoke clears over Okinawa's blood-stained waters, the mathematics of survival reveal their harsh truth. Lieutenant Yukio Seki's revolutionary concept of human-guided weapons had indeed changed naval warfare's fundamental equations, but not enough to overcome American systematic adaptation. The statistics tell the story with brutal clarity. Of the 100 kamikaze attacks launched during the Okinawa campaign, combat air patrol fighters intercepted and destroyed 500, a staggering 45% success rate. Anti-aircraft fire accounted for another 38% of the attackers. Only 17% of kamikazes successfully struck their targets, and most of those hits occurred against smaller vessels like destroyers and escorts rather than the high-value aircraft carriers they sought. Captain Julian Beckton survived Laffey's ordeal to command other ships, but the experience marked him forever. "You develop a different relationship with death," he reflected years later. "When you've watched young men die defending mathematical concepts, radar coverage, interception angles, ammunition expenditure rates, you understand that war is ultimately about systems competing against human will." For the kamikaze pilots who returned from failed missions, shame proved more devastating than American bullets. Flight Petty Officer Hachiro Hosokawa, who flew 5 missions without finding targets, later wrote, "We were taught that death was our success, but survival felt like failure. The Americans had turned our certainty into confusion." The tactical revolution that began with Yukio Seki's sacrifice at Leyte Gulf ultimately demonstrated the limits of individual heroism against institutional adaptation. American combat air patrol tactics evolved from reactive defense to predictive interception, creating multiple engagement opportunities that transformed desperate Japanese innovation into manageable threat. Vice Admiral McCain's Big Blue Blanket strategy proved most decisive. By destroying kamikazes at their source, American fighters eliminated the threat before it could develop. Over 600 Japanese aircraft were destroyed on the ground during the Okinawa campaign, preventing attacks that statistics suggest would have killed thousands more American sailors. But the human cost transcended any mathematical calculation. The kamikaze campaign produced over 2,300 Japanese pilot deaths while killing approximately 5,000 American servicemen and wounding 5,000 more. Each statistic represented sons, fathers, and brothers whose names are carved on memorials across 2 nations. Today's military strategists study combat air patrol evolution as foundational doctrine for integrated air defense. From radar-guided surface-to-air missiles to computer-controlled close-in weapon systems, modern naval vessels employ the same layered defensive concept that McCain pioneered against the kamikazes: multiple interception opportunities creating cumulative probability of survival. The lesson echoes across decades. Individual courage and sacrifice, no matter how profound, cannot overcome systematic preparation and adaptive tactics. In the deadly mathematics of combat, institutions that learn and evolve will always defeat those that rely solely on human will. Experience more untold stories of Gyeoptau Dotai's most dramatic moments. Subscribe now and discover the human faces behind history's greatest battles.